Evening, everyone. Tonight, we are delighted to welcome author Ayelet Tsabari in conversation with Andrew Silo Carroll for a timely story steeped in Jewish identity at a time when our own literary marketplace has become hostile to Israel voices. I'm Thea Wieseltier, and thank you for joining us on behalf of the New York Jewish Week and UJA Federation for this month's Folio Literary Series. Our partner, UJA, Federation of New York, knows the importance of supporting the diverse Sephardic and Mizrahi community, and they are lifting up the values, the cultures, practices, and identities of this rich part of New York's Jewish landscape. That's in addition to UJA's abiding work to care for people in need, address anti-Semitism, and strengthen Jewish life. And as Israel continues to navigate the long-term effects post-October 7th, thanks to our amazing community, many of you are here, UJA has invested more than $373 million so far to address every imaginable need across Israel. One day soon, the hope is that things will improve. For now, it's so important to remain loud and proud of our Jewish life. With that, we turn to Ayelet and Andy to start this evening's program. Thank you.
Thank you, Thea, and welcome to the audience. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Ayelet Tsabari, celebrated Israeli author, known for her evocative storytelling, exploration of identity, belonging, cultural heritage. Her debut short story collection, The Best Place on Earth, won the Sammy Rohr Prize for Jewish Literature and was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. Her memoir, The Art of Leaving, garnered critical acclaim. And her latest work that we're going to talk about tonight is Songs for the Brokenhearted. It's a poignant debut novel that delves into the complexities of family, identity, and the untold stories of Yemenite Jews in Israel. It's set across two timelines, the 1950s and the 1990s. I think we'll talk about why that time period, especially if that's the period of Oslo and the Rabin assassination. The narrative follows Zohara, a 30-something Yemeni Israeli woman living in New York who returns home to Israel after her mother dies. And their family secrets come out and her own identity is challenged. The novel has received numerous accolades, including the 2025 National Jewish Book Award for Fiction. And it's a terrific read. It's a terrific wake-up call about whatever you think of Israel, that there's not only one story to tell. So, Ayelet, I want to welcome you to our podcast, or not podcast, our Zoom. And I want to hear more about this book. I just wanted to remind you, a couple of years ago, I met you for the first time at I think it was maybe your memoir launch at the Jewish Museum in New York.
Yeah.
And not the best part, your reading, of course, was the best part. But they served Jacques Noon out in the lobby. So
Did they really? Oh, I don't remember that. That's
absolutely,
amazing.
I think it was the first time I ever tasted it. So
That's
I want to thank
amazing.
you, like for a million ways, introducing me to Yemeni culture. So maybe start with that. I'll say this, I'm talking too much, but I'll just say this. If you do read this novel, or for those who have read this novel, you can't miss the afterword, because Ayelet talks about her research and why she chose this setting. And maybe if you can tell us a little bit about that, that would be terrific.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for this beautiful introduction, Andrew. I am so happy to be here and talk to all of you. This is a big question, so maybe I'll try to get it more specific. Yeah, do you want me to talk about specifically why I wrote about the Yemeni community, or do you want to talk about the timelines?
Why don't you jump right into what? Tell me about Yemeni Song. There's and why? Because I think this is a novel about women being heard who never are heard. And so tell us about how you got excited about writing about Yemenite song.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. So I've been researching Yemeni Jewish stories for quite a while now. I think I started maybe 15 years ago, and every time I kind of tackle the different aspect of Yemeni Jewish community and traditions. And at some point, I got a grant, a generous grant from the Chalmers Foundation in Canada to speak to elderly Yemeni women about their lives, about their folkloric wisdom, their recipes, their songs. Now, I knew about the songs, but I don't think I didn't have vast knowledge or understanding of what it was. And I started traveling in all these Yemeni, you know, communities in Israel, villages and neighborhoods that were mostly Yemeni inhabited, and just talk to women. And often they started singing. And it was, like unprompted sometimes, and sometimes they would drum on a pan or like a pot. And the songs were in Arabic, so in Yemeni Arabic, and I didn't always understand the lyrics, but I kind of got the feeling, and they were just loaded with emotion. And the way that I heard about they kind of kept telling me of other people I should interview, or you should go there, or you should go talk to that person, or you should visit this neighborhood. And somehow I arrived at Gila Bishari, who is a wonderful singer, Yemeni singer. And she is so knowledgeable about the musical traditions of Yemeni Jews. And she explained to me about the difference between the men's songs and the women's songs, which is something I didn't quite understood. So the men's songs are devotional. They're in Hebrew, and they're about God and Zion and redemption and return and all of this. But the women's songs were in Arabic because they did not speak Hebrew. They didn't, pray. They didn't go to school. The women didn't go to school. So they didn't actually know the language. So and they were about domestic things. They were about love, and they were about heartbreak, and they were about jealousy, and they were just their way of owning their narrative and their voices and expressing themselves in a culture that really, where they were oppressed, they were silenced. And the songs were just, once she started explaining it to me and translated some of them to me, I was like, oh my God, like I fell in love with that tradition. And I remember driving away from Gila that day and thinking to myself two thoughts. The first one was that I need to learn to sing, that it wasn't enough for me to be all theoretical about it. Like, as a Jewish Yemeni woman, it was my, obligation to actually learn the songs, because it was something that was passed on from mother to daughter. And the second thing was, I understood at that moment that this was it. This was the kind of the thing that unlocked the novel that I was starting to write and wasn't quite, I was kind of lost in it in the early stages of it and didn't know where it's going. And that was the thing that unlocked it for me, that the songs had to be woven into it. The songs were a big way, not just woven into it, but a big way of telling the story that I wanted to tell.
And
Yeah.
you have a suggestion in the book, which I'll pass on to our audience, which is, after this is over, you should jump over to YouTube and
Yeah.
find music by Gila Bishari. It's
Yeah.
kind of stunning. I never heard anything like it. So
Oh, she's so wonderful. Yeah.
So you have a character in this book who's probably a contemporary of yours. It's up to you to say how autobiographical it is,
Yeah.
but she kind of grows up the children of first generation. I mean, they came over from Yemen, and she's sent off to a mostly Ashkenazi private school and doesn't know much about this heritage. Is that your story? Did you come to this late in life where you realized how rich your own heritage was, but it wasn't looked upon kindly in Israel, as I understand?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is kind of my story. I did not, I was not sent to a fancy boarding school, but that is the reality of some Mizrahi. There's schools like that. I made up that particular school, but there are schools like that. And I have spoken in my interviews, I've spoken to women who have gone on that journey, on that experience, that, you know, being kind of taken away from their families and sent to a school, which was such a privilege on one hand, but on the other hand, really cut them off their own heritage and made them feel alienated from it. So for me, the story was a little bit different, but similarly, I grew up feeling that, you know, I talk about it a lot, how like when you don't read about yourself in books, especially for a kid who loved books so much and loved reading so much, and you don't see yourself and your family represented in literature and in the media, when what you do see is very stereotypical. And in history books, what you're taught is, you know, mostly Ashkenazi. Yeah, you do grow up kind of wanting, developing an understanding of what is important, what counts, what stories, you know, matter. And in that sense, yes, I felt myself wanting to distance myself from my heritage as a child, as a teen, and only later in life started to see and appreciate it, and yeah, like you said, the richness of it, you know, the depth of it, the depth of experience, and which is what I guess, I'm trying to do in my work, to kind of celebrate it, you know, and yeah.
I think people watching, just in case they don't know the context, you're going to, you know, your book takes us back to the 50s at a time. I mean, now you look at Israel and you see, you know, it's a great salad of Mizrahi and Ashkenazi, and there's intermarriage between the two groups. But back in the 50s, the white Ashkenazi Labor Party was very much in control, and
Yeah.
the Mizrahim were looked down upon, discriminated against. You have a character who says, this is one academic talking to another. She says, "Let's face it, Israeliness is at its core Ashkenazi, and it's no secret it's hard to succeed as a Mizrahi woman in Israel, especially in academia." So bring me back a little bit to I guess it's your parents' generation, as they come over from Yemen, culture shock, and it's not just trying to make a living in a new country, but they have a few obstacles in their way.
Yeah, so in my personal story, because it is different than the story depicted in the book, my family actually came earlier. In fact, like my grandparents came in 1934, so they were spared some of the hardships that were associated with the transition camps, right? Of course, it was hard. You know, it's always it was very difficult, but it was not that mass immigration that arrived in 1948. And still, yeah, some of the discriminations we're talking about, if we talk about the women in particular, I said before that they did not speak the language, right? So that was, of course, like, I don't think I understood that until I became an immigrant myself. When I moved to Canada, I remember suddenly acknowledging and recognizing what my grandparents have gone through, and especially my grandmother, who did not even speak the language, and was illiterate in 2 languages, as I you know, jokingly say. But yeah, it was absolutely, I'm trying to kind of like, it's so hard to speak about discrimination. It's such a massive and large thing, you know, and to kind of just pinpoint what was the hardship like. But yeah, they were just
We
looked
could talk
down
about
as an other, you
Mhm.
know, basically that's what it was. It was an othering, and the othering sometimes came with a dehumanization
Mhm.
even, right? Which is what led to some of the real injustice that happened with, for example, the missing children affair
Right, I want to
that
talk about.
happened.
I
Yeah.
let's just remind folks what that was. It's difficult to talk about because, you know, a lot of us hold Israel in such esteem. But talk about this episode, when it was, and what happened to some of these children.
Yeah, it is. It's heartbreaking. But what happened was that from 48 until the late 50s, and some cases are even later, but these were the main times. Children had gone missing from immigration camps, from transition camps, sometimes from hospitals, and the ways the children were mostly Yemeni. I would say about 3/4 of them were Yemeni, some were Mizrahi, and like I say in the book, even the odd Ashkenazi child. And the way that they had gone missing were always the same, or not always the same, but overwhelmingly similar stories of a child is developing a cold, um, taken to a hospital overnight, and then the parents are told the following day that the children, the babies, it's usually babies or toddlers, have died overnight. There were no death certificates, no graves, no bodies shown. My own personal connection to this story, apart from just being a Yemeni descent and just seeing people with that trauma in their past, stories of so many people that I know, like, oh, his sister had gone missing and their grandparents lost a child and so on. But I have an aunt who came in 1948. She's married to my uncle, and she had a cold, taken to a hospital, and then the next day when her father came to the hospital, he was told that she died. And he just would not accept it. So he tore down the hospital and found her in one of the rooms dressed in different clothing. No one really knows what happened. It's been shrouded in mystery for a very long time. For a while there, the files were just closed. I remember when I started looking into it about 12 years ago, and I came to the archives in Jerusalem, and these were the files that I could not access. Whenever I wanted to, look into that story, I hit a dead end. There was no way you could look at the stories, which seemed a bit strange. Nowadays, most files have been opened because Netanyahu ordered them to be open. Netanyahu also offered some compensation for some of the families. I think it was 2016 or 2017. Just a few, I think a few dozen families was offered compensation. These were the few that were lost, like I talk about it in the book, like Zohara's brother, lost even in the eyes of the authorities. Because after there have been three committees that investigated the affair, they mostly concluded, oh, they've all died, and there's just been such chaos, and we can't find all the bodies, but this is what we concluded. And most families have not been satisfied with those answers. Yeah, and there have been some DNA testing, there have been some families that found, but very few. So people say to me sometimes, like, well, where are they then? And it's possible also that many of them had died, but nevertheless, even if that's what happened, the way that it was done, when we talk about kidnapping is taking any child from the parents, even just without their agreement, even if they had died and were not given to adoption, like some families strongly believe, it's still, something that needs to be acknowledged and recognized, and the families need some closure that never came.
So I don't want to give anyone the idea that this book is a piece of dry history. It's very much a novel, beautifully written novel. And it's not just talking about the hardships that Yemenite Jews face, but also just the pleasures and the it's a celebration of their culture. The book is full of food, and I just talk a little bit about the food, and I'm trying to recapture the joys of growing up with a culture that some people overlook because they think Israel is just hummus and,
Yeah.
Ashkenazi.
Yeah, that's right. And it's also a love story, I should say.
I
Lots
love
of
it.
two love stories in there.
That is.
It's important to note. But yeah, food is really important to me. And I grew up in such a food culture. And I grew up, that's the other thing. It's also a celebration of women, and I grew up with such strong and loud and um, passionate women, and I think that's something that, and was who made great food. And I think that's one of the things that I was trying to reconcile by writing this book, because on one hand I knew how oppressed and silenced they were, and then on the other hand I see these women and they're so, they're just such a joy to be around and be fed by them. And that was kind of the thing that I was trying to capture through these songs, because for me the songs were the answer to that. I was like, this is how they still rebelled, this is how they still spoke their minds back then, because that was all they could do, you know and now that they can, they're show themselves in their all their colors. Yeah, yeah,
And you actually joined one of those singing groups, right? You talked about that earlier, but of women sharing these. And again, when we say sharing, a lot of these songs haven't been written down. It's an oral tradition, and some of them
yeah.
improvise. So tell us about you taking part in some of these choral groups.
Yeah, so I should explain. You're right. Because they're oral, it's an oral tradition, and the songs are passed on, like I said, from mother to daughter. They were not written down and they're not fixed. They change, right? Like one woman, every poetess, as they call it, meshoreret, from the, would sing it a little bit differently. They would, put together one line from here and one line from that song, different lyrics to different melodies, and so on. Um, when I first of all, like, I came just as a spectator, to some of these groups. When I was doing the interviews, I interviewed a lot of one-on-one, but sometimes I would join groups of women, and that was when it really shone, that kind of tradition. But after I studied with Gila, I actually sang in several groups over the years. I am a part of a choir, but that choir is just a choir of women. It's we don't sing Yemeni songs, but they are open to it. The because I suggested it before, and they are open to it. But yeah, I've sang with Gila and a bunch of other women in several capacities, and that's really where it's not meant to be sung alone, you know what I mean? Like, um when I did my launch in Vancouver, they asked me if I would sing, and I said yes, but it's important that I find women to do it with, because that's what the tradition is all about. It's about a sisterhood, it's about coming together to share stories, it's a conversation. And so I found two young Yemeni Israeli women in Vancouver who sang with me. We practiced, and yeah, it was a really moving thing for them too, to just kind of reconnect with
Mhm.
their heritage in such a way. Um, yeah, if you go on my Instagram, you will find
Oh,
a
good.
couple short samples of me singing with
Good.
these women in my launches. Yeah.
Right. I wasn't going to ask you to perform right now, so that's great.
No, that will not happen.
That'll be.
It's too late.
You mentioned it's very much a romance. Readers will find themselves going back and forth between Team Near and Team Iggy. Who,
But don't give it away.
I won't
No
give it away.
spoilers.
Your main character's love interests. So it's definitely has its pleasures as novel. Again, I don't want to mislead anybody, but I do want to ask about the political. You set the novel in and around that period in which, and this is not giving anything away,
Mhm.
Rabin was assassinated.
Yeah,
Um, why was it important you to kind of step away from the present moment and set what really becomes, what are we talking, 30 years later, a historical novel?
I know, it's crazy, eh, that it's
Right.
historical. Um, so the there's a couple reasons to that. And the first one is technical.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that I wanted to write about the beginning. I wanted to write about the founding of Israel. I wanted to write about the transition camps. And it's interesting because I think both those times, the 50s and the 90s, are times of such upheaval and such great hope as well, right? Great hope and great turmoil both at the same time. So they have this kind of parallels in them. But when I knew that I wanted to include the missing children, and like you said, the book is not about that. It's
Mm-hmm.
in the background because it is such a big part of the Yemeni community experience that I felt that it was necessary that it would be there in the background of their lives. So when I did the math and had to have a character whose brother went missing during those times, the 90s were basically the latest that I could make it still work technically, right? And so I'm sitting there and kind of playing with times and trying to figure out when would be a good time to land. And suddenly it just was very clear to me that parallel that I mentioned between the 50s and the 90s. And also personally, I came of age in the 90s. I'm like a child of the 90s. It's a time for me of great hope. And the assassination of Rabin happened. I often wonder about what if and what would my life have been like. Maybe I wouldn't have left because I left soon after that. And it's been a major plot point in my own life as well. So yeah, it's suddenly again kind of like the unlocking that happened with the singing, the women's songs. Once I landed on 1995, it just unlocked that kind of mirroring in those two eras that made perfect sense to me. But yeah, that's how it started in a just a technical math thing.
So we should say you left Israel for Canada and you lived in Canada for
That's right.
and now you're back in
For
Tel
20 years. For 20 years.
and now you're back in
Yeah.
Tel Aviv,
And now I live in Tel Aviv. That's right.
which is a good transition to my next question. But first, I want to urge folks who are listening, if you have a question for Ayelet, put it in the Q&A. And I hope we can get to all of them. If we can't, I apologize in advance, but that's the place to drop your messages and your congratulations or your questions. Your book is very much about home. Where is a home? What counts for a home? And I just want to read a lovely passage. This is your narrator saying, despite everything, and she's writing about Israel having been abroad for a number of years. Despite everything, this was the only home I knew, flawed, imperfect, but home. And though my sense of belonging was fractured, still I belonged here more than anywhere else. Maybe that's why I held on to this dream of peace so desperately. I needed to believe we were heading somewhere better. If peace came, maybe we would finally be able to let out the breath we'd been holding for 47 years and exhale. Both beautifully,
Yeah.
it's beautifully written and so bittersweet to hear.
Yeah.
Maybe discuss a little all the notions of home that are in this book, because every generation is like, the parents' generation is looking backwards at the home they left, even though it's inhospitable right now. Talk about that a bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear it now too, after obviously a book that was written before October 7, and hearing it now, and it's even more bittersweet and even more painful even to hear my own words spoken back to me in that way. Yeah, I think writing about home is something that really characterized a lot of my work in general, in my first two books as well. And I often wonder about that. And you're right that all of these characters are sort of grappling with the notions of home. Each one of them, Yagub, one of the main characters there as well, who's thinking about, like you said, Yemen and Israel, that place that they long to, but yet, he was born in Yemen, and what's the tension between those two places. And on a smaller, scale, with Yoni, another character, and what is home to him, living with his mom and her new husband, and a new family he feels adjacent to, and so on. And of course, Zohara, like we said. Just like Zohara, I feel like my own sense of home was fractured as well. And parts of it, and I think that's why I also write a lot about grief and about loss, I attribute to losing my father as a child, because I think losing a parent at such a young age, it's a time where identity is very much entwined with theirs, and we feel like they are our home, our parents are our homeland. And when that happens, there's like sort of a loss of a sense of home that happens, and characterizes that child. And I think that's a really big reason for me why I'm so interested and so haunted by that, by that question of what is home. And then, of course, then that led to me leaving, and then returning after 20 years is really not a return. It's more like a reverse migration. And there's still a sense of foreignness. And still, like Zohara, I belong here more than anywhere else.
Someone asked on the chat, and you tell me if you're comfortable talking about this, why you decided to return when you did, to go back to Israel.
Yeah, so mainly family. Really feeling the need after many years of not really. I sometimes feel like, and maybe it's all 20-year-olds are like that, but I feel like sometimes like I could be a little short-sighted, and I sometimes attribute that to losing my father as well as a child. But suddenly I was a mom and alone in a country without family, and that really, I really felt that. I really felt the need to have family around me. But it's that first and foremost, but it's not just that. I've always really longed for Israel. I've always missed it, like profoundly, which is why I was writing about it, like it was a way for me to kind of visit it. When you think about The Best Place on Earth, which is a book that I've written entirely while living in Canada. It's a book about Israel. All the stories take place, in places that I loved, in the sea and in Eilat and in like Jerusalem. And yeah, so yeah.
So you're
I
in good
missed
company.
it.
Yeah, James Joyce, he wrote Dubliners in Exile. So you're in very good company.
There you go. There you go.
Another question, which I think spins off of the last one quite well, which is my friend Ellie asks about the language you write in.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
About translations and what
Yeah. Yeah.
now that you're in Israel. Tell us about your method and what language you write in, and do you feel comfortable writing in both if called upon?
Yeah, wow. I write in English almost exclusively. And that kind of connects to so many things I talked about already. It relates to home, it relates to migration. There's something about writing in a second language that allows me a certain distance from which to write about Israel. And when I was living in Canada, I had that physical distance. Now that I live in Israel, it's still, I don't have the physical distance, but writing in English gives me that, grants me that kind of defamiliarization that I feel is really necessary to write, for me personally, to write well about this place. I'm working on a translation. I call it a rewriting or a writing anew, because it doesn't really feel like translation when you do it yourself, and especially when you sort of send the narrative back into where it really, at its soul, came from. Right? Even though it was written in English, there's something about rewriting it in Hebrew. It's kind of almost like giving it taking it back home, like to its true self, strangely. And I find it hard. To the point that at times I wondered if I'm an idiot and why am I doing this to myself?
Mhm.
Because the work has already been written once. The sentence are already did what they needed to do. But I'm doing it, and I felt strongly that this time I needed to do it myself. And maybe that is also something about just wanting to be in Hebrew for a moment. And some of it is wanting to be challenged, because the writing in English is also coming from that place of wanting to be challenged, because I thrive on that. Like, this is how I feel more creative and more, like I do better when it's not too easy. So I guess now the challenge, the Hebrew, the rewriting in Hebrew is such a challenge. And I guess I need that. Yeah.
So there are a few comments that aren't really questions, but people I think want to share their stories because you did. So someone writes, I am American born of Iraqi Jewish parents. I recently read your story, A Simple Girl, and I just wanted to say how much I liked it and felt it reflected my feelings as a Mizrahi woman. And
Thank you so much. Yeah.
someone else writes, I am Yemenite on my mother's side. My grandmother was born outside in Salwan.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, someone. Jerusalem in 1900. She spoke Yemeni, which is
Yeah.
Judeo-Arabic, I would assume. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
My Yemenite grandfather was a cantor. His recordings are in the archives at Indiana University.
Oh, wow.
Language of the recordings is
beautiful. Yeah.
one of your characters on this topic, and then I want to talk a little bit about contemporary Israel and get some of your thoughts on that. But at one point, one of your characters says, uses a phrase that I think will sound maybe a little surprising to some American Jewish ears. She writes, by the end of my 4th year, driven by my newfound interest in my own Arabness. And so tell me a little bit about, we over the years, maybe in the last 2 years especially, we've come to think of Arab and Jewish are distinct identities.
Yeah.
The same land, and yet for a Yemenite Jew, there is a sense of Arabness. You talk about it and what that means for a sense of identity?
Yeah. So that is such an interesting, that term, like there's something so contentious about it. And I think when I first encountered that idea of an Arab Jew, it was during my 30s, and I was working at a Lebanese restaurant in Canada, and I found a strange, like this was a city at the time that had hardly any Israelis, like it's not the case anymore. But at the time, there were like 5 Israelis in Vancouver, Canada. There was no Hebrew, spoken in the street. And I found myself quite comfortable in that settings of that Lebanese restaurant that was really kind of a pan-Arab kind of thing. It was a hub for Middle Eastern people in the city. It wasn't just Lebanese, and there were Saudis and there were Iranians and so on. And I kind of landed there, and I fit in, I with my music and my looks and my, the food and the dance and everything kind of fit. And that's when I started, I became interested in that. I remember one of the favorite belly dancers in the restaurant was an Iraqi Jew, for example. And one of the men who drummed was an Egyptian Jew, like there was something there that felt like I joke, it was like a new Middle East that I was invited to take part in. It's like this beautiful, um, paradise situation. So I started kind of using it, and I noticed that a lot of people were very offended by it, and some people were curious by it. And I kind of fell in love with that, with how contentious it was. Now, if you asked my grandmother, who's no longer with us, she would, scoff at this. Like in Yemen, there were Arabs and there were Jews. And the Muslims were the Arabs and the Jews were the Yehudi. They were not, considered. They were all Yemenis, but it's just kind of the subtlety of that, right? Because in Iraq, though, and we have an Iraqi Jewish person in the comments, they did consider themselves. I think some of them, anyways, did consider themselves Arab Jews. Sami Michael, the famous Iraqi writer, identified, who just recently died at the age of 90, he identified as an Arab Jew. There is, a complex identity of Mizrahi Jews that sort of kind of straddle that line in ways that isn't acknowledged and isn't celebrated in the Ashkenazi world, and in North America in particular. But yeah, and if you go to Israel and you see how we look like, it's sometimes hard to separate the Arabs from the Jews as well, right? Like there is, to many Jews, the Middle Easternness, the Arabness is a part of their identity. Yeah, especially I would say in Israel, because that's where most Mizrahi Jews live.
Right. So I want to ask about what's happening now. I know you wrote, the book appeared last year,
Yeah.
right in the midst of a war, a trauma for both Israel and I think Jews. Tell me, how do you think this changed the reception? Were there challenges that you don't remember from your previous book tours? I know some Israeli and Jewish writers have said they've had some trouble getting audiences, or at least getting publicity, because of their publishers are wary of putting Israeli ideas out there right now. So can I ask you to talk about your experience?
Yeah, sadly, that is absolutely the case for me as well. And I always like to frame that discussion, because I feel, first of all, I feel comfortable talking about it because that's what is going on. But it's just important for me to say that it's sure, it's my livelihood, but this is a terrible time, and some people have lost everything. And I just, like it's just, perspective is important to mention when we discuss this. Yes, it absolutely have been more challenging than with my previous two books. And it is notable because my first book was a book of short stories, which generally, doesn't tend to get as much attention. And my second book was a memoir. And the third one was the novel, the anticipated novel, and a third book. And I think there was some expectation amongst my publishers and my publicist and my agent that this would be bigger. And it didn't quite happen as we wished in that sense. And you said it's hard to get publicity. I think that is what it is mostly. And of course, publicity, what leads to, not necessarily, but generally that's how we get more readers. it's you know, certain things like festivals that I have been invited to in the past that have expressed how they can't wait for the novel so they can invite me again and did not invite me. It's my publicist, you know, frankly telling me that they're frustrated with how difficult it's been,
Mhm.
you know. Um, it's radio shows that I've been invited to with my first two books that I wasn't invited to.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's reviews that, you know, I've again received in the past and not this time. Magazines that have highlighted the book. And I think it's more, it is really that I have an Israeli name. It's a book about Israel. And yeah, and I live here,
Mhm.
you know, so it's like, yeah.
So you mentioned,
Um,
the kind of the Arab and Jewish community you enjoyed back in Toronto, and I'm wondering how this has frayed personal relationships. Or did you have artistic relationships with folks from all sides of the political spectrum, Jews and
yeah.
Arabs? Uh, what was the effect of the war, the October 7th, and the
Um,
relationships?
it did affect relationships, absolutely. Um, I have and just to be clear, I am quite left, you
Mhm.
know, in my views. I have no problem saying that. Um, I think, yeah, it's I've always been vocally critical of Netanyahu, um, and this government in particular. It doesn't really matter though, to the people who blocked me,
Yeah.
you know. And yeah, I've lost a couple of friends, not as many as some people that I know. Um, I've been, in fact, sometimes surprised by, you know, I went to Canada soon after, and I visited Canada frequently, and I was surprised by, you know, people recognizing and giving me love. um, it's sad to say that I was surprised. I know,
Mhm.
but it
Yeah.
shows you that I expected the worst, you know, because yeah,
Yeah, I imagine.
it's hard to talk about. Yeah, it's hard to talk about for sure. Mhm.
Someone I want a reader question here, which is interesting. They ask, "Are you worried?" I'll read it their way, and I'll try to read it.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
He said, "Are you worried about being pigeonholed as that Yemenite Jewish Israeli writer?" And I'll add to that question. And are there topics you're interested in exploring that go a little bit far afield from kind of the your history and your family dynamics and
Yeah.
that?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I'm not too worried about it because first of all, I've often said that I feel like, you know, maybe one day I might want to write something else, but right now I'm very much still interested in exploring that identity and celebrating my community and giving it voice. When you come, I think, from a culture that has been so underrepresented, um, it felt like a mission for me. Um, but that said, like even when I think about my book of short stories, um, often for me it was just having those characters appear in stories. So it didn't even have to be about their identity. It
Mhm.
just having characters that are Yemeni, that are Mizrahi, portrayed in literature, you know,
Mhm.
just going about their lives. That is also for me, you know, important and a success.
Mhm.
So it might not be, you know, my next book might not be as, you know, deeply Yemeni, but I am committed to writing about those characters, about Yemeni characters, about Mizrahi characters, and populating my book with those characters. Yeah.
Someone else asked they asked how have the Mizrahi communities received your book. She's asking about Israel and America, and I guess that's and I'll add to that. Do you find there are different receptions among different kinds of readers, and that you can that have become kind of what's the pattern in terms of the responses you get?
Yeah. Honestly, some of the comments that I receive from Mizrahi readers and Yemeni readers, I'm so moving to me that it makes me want to cry right now. Because when I started writing, I was thinking about how I didn't see myself, right? And how I wasn't, this is all I wanted was to create those stories that were missing from my childhood, and those characters that were missing from my childhood. And when I hear from Mizrahi readers and from Yemeni readers that they see themselves, that how much it means to them, to read about their mothers and their grandmothers, and it's everything to me. It means everything to me. So yeah, this has been my experience mostly, I would say. Yeah,
That's great.
it means a lot.
And this Ashkenazi reader is also very appreciative, but for for different reasons. But thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
There's a word that comes up in your book a lot, and it's hope. It's written at a hopeful time, hopes dashed, hopes like you talked about this earlier. And I'm wondering at this moment, how are you feeling in terms of on the spectrum from hope to existential despair, if we can go that far, at this moment in Israeli history?
Yeah,
it's a hard one, I know.
Yeah, it's a hard one.
If you'd rather not.
It's been hard. It's been hard being here. Feels very divided within Israeli society. Yeah, it's like I find hope in a lot of doing, in volunteering, in protesting, in writing. Yeah, in just kind of like personal connections. Yeah, there are good people, and it's good to surround yourself with them. But it's not easy. It's work.
Right. Yeah.
It's work.
Right. But maybe the most important work there is, I guess, at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was wondering in the last few minutes, people were really excited to hear about Gila Bashari.
Yeah.
I think they would. I'm feeling a hunger out there for more recommendations of
Oh, absolutely.
culture. Are there singers we should be looking for?
Yes, absolutely. So there's AWA, A-WA. You may have heard of them. A group of three, like a band of three sisters who sing from the women's songs and have actually written an entire album in the tradition of it. And the oldest one, Ta'ir Chaim, Haim, is now having a solo career as well. Other people, we have Shiran Avraham. She also sings Yemeni music, young artist, less famous than Ewa, wonderful. Let's go a little bit back. Bracha Cohen, she's mentioned in the book, is one of the old Yemeni singers who's just wonderful. And Zion Golan he's a man who sings a lot from the women's songs, also very famous traditional Yemeni singers. And more new ones is I have Banat Il Yemen, is a group of young women in Israel right now that is just starting out. And on my website, there's a book club kit with a playlist,
Oh, that's
and you can
perfect.
also find the playlist just if you go on Spotify and look for Songs for the Brokenhearted and my name. You should be able to find it. I created a playlist with several songs. And some of these people that I mentioned are in there. All of them, I think, actually. Yeah.
Lovely. Oh, no, that's perfect. I
Yeah.
want to thank you. I just want to say, is there anything you wanted to talk about we didn't get to? I think we covered a lot of ground, but I just want to make sure that you feel, there's something you wanted to say about the book or about Israel or about publishing that we didn't touch on.
I don't think so. Sandra Cohen asked me if I wear Magen David, but I'm in Israel, but I do, so not as important, but I do wear Hamsa.
How you do it?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's
I
funny.
just
You
want to
don't
wear
have to
Hamsa.
represent in Israel because everyone represents.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
But even abroad, I wear it everywhere and always. It's from my
Uh,
mom, and yeah,
that
I
is
wear it
probably, the Hamsa is probably the biggest crossover between
That's
Israel
right.
and Ashkenazim. I don't know a family, including us, who doesn't have a wall of Hamsas.
That's right.
Uh,
That's right.
it's a
Yeah.
and it's a beautiful thing. It feels more Israeli than, my silver menorah.
Yeah, I agree.
Straight
I
out of
agree.
Minsk. But
Hmm.
it's beautiful. So
Yeah.
I really want to thank you for a beautiful book,
Thank you so much.
and again, an entertaining book, folks. I know there's a lot of we've talked about children. Oh, but some people were confused about what happened, the fate of the children. I should just mention this quickly. There was investigations. The idea that they were adopted by Ashkenazi families. It's a
Yeah.
little bit like what happened to the First Nations in Canada, some American
Hmm.
Indian tribes, where the idea
That's right.
wanted to kind of uh, assimilate, put them on the fast track to assimilation, let's say,
Hmm.
but it ended up
Hmm.
with really tragic consequences for the families.
Hmm.
So you can read all about it.
Yeah.
I know if you read the book, I think in the afterword you have recommendations for a number of
That's right.
research where
That's right.
I've looked into
That's
this,
right.
and again, it hasn't fully been resolved, even though,
No.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I should mention that. So definitely another reason to get the book. Ayelet, thank you
Yeah.
so much. Uh,
Thank you.
and we will look forward to your next book, and come to us because we're always happy to talk to you.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay. And thanks everyone for listening. I just want to close it. I don't want to leave without thanking our partners here at my partners at 70 Faces Media. That's Thea Wieseltier and Becky Phillips, who are handling the technical end and all the back end stuff that makes all this look very easy from where we're sitting. So Thea and Becky, thank you so much. And we'll see you at the next folio.